This video will analyse the truth behind this meme. How accurate is it? Having analysed meme after meme depicting Confucius in the worst possible light, I finally found one which portrays him fairly, and a previous meme on the legalists that I analysed were also clearly written by Han propagandists keen to slander the legalists. Thus, I could only rely on myself to make one which portrayed them both fairly. Sitting on top of the meme version of himself, dressed garishly like a degenerate Ottoman at the end of their empire. Prevails as state ideology, it says. Confucianism spread during the Han Dynasty, as several Confucians influenced its founder Liu Bang and his governance style. His progeny Han Wudi instituted the first imperial entrance exams, and their whole content was focused on Confucian texts, cementing the link between Chinese imperial dynasties and Confucianism for the next 2,000 years. One might say Confucius was the real Chad after all. I haven't even mentioned his legacy in the realms of recorded history, and his own rather impressive life. On the right, shovel in hand for building the Great Wall, is the legalist, like Shang Yang, who invented China as a concept. Before the Qing unification, what China essentially was a Yellow River region civilization, opposing the Yi horse peoples to the north of the Wall and the Yellow River. The idea preceded the Qin during the Zhou and the Shang. However, Qin cemented the Yangtze, Changjiang and Yellow River regions as being one people. It wasn't until the Qin that this happened. In the long run, this was a lifesaver for Chinese civilization. The Yellow River was, whilst fertile, an awful river, up to 40% sediment, and huge changes in the river's course racked the Yellow River basin on many occasions over the millennia. The stable and highly fertile southern river became refuge to many a literati from the north, fleeing nomadic horseman takeovers. From the Qin onwards, this geographic region, over the arch of history, came together only to fall apart in degenerative periods, only to come together again under great leaders like Zhu Yanjiang in the Ming and Li Shimin during the Tang. And of Confucius, had others do the work for him. For the last 2,500 years after his death, multiple disciples, both connected to him and self-proclaimed, took up Confucian ideals for themselves, adding to his ideas, taking them away, adapting. They called themselves Rujia, the school of Confucianism. People like Mencius, Mengzi, Xunzi and Zhuxi, the neo-Confucianist much later on, all considered themselves to be followers of the old sage. They had different perspectives, but all claimed to love his ideals. It was these people who would spread Confucianism to Japan, Korea and Southeast Asia in the following millennia. Confucius had others do the work for him. Of Shang Yang and the legalists, they were meritocratic. Indeed they were. The ideal of a legalist state in Qin and subsequently the whole of China after Shang Yang's reforms, the Shang Yang Bianfa, was that of rewards and punishments turning people's self-interest towards soldiering and farming for the good of the state, for example, by rewarding those who were good in battle with rank and those over-delivering on farming quotas the same, and ignoring all previous hierarchy. Therefore, this statement is mostly true, but one exception had to be made for the ruling family of Ying. Although they could be punished by the law, they maintained their positions via hereditary privilege. Memorized by scholars for 2,000 years, it says of the sitting Confucius. Yes, indeed, Han Wudi onwards, knowledge of the Confucian canon became inextricably linked with moving up in the world. A position as a civil servant was the reward for passing the Keju, the imperial exam, the content of which was almost entirely the Confucian canon, and memorizing it had to be done for the test. So, for the last 2,000 years, all the imperial dynasties, major figures throughout Chinese history, Du Fu, and many others, and many poets, attempted to take this exam and memorize the hundreds of thousands of words that made up the Confucian canon. By the end of the last imperial Qing dynasty, thousands of scholars attempted to pass the exam every year, and many of them failed with a pass rate exceedingly low. One of those failures was one Hong Shouquan, the leader of the Taiping Rebellion, who some say failure in the exam caused him to go mad. And it says standardized language as a civilization of the written word rather than the oral like others. The standardization of the language was of paramount importance. For 400 years previous to the Qing Dynasty unification in 221 BC, during the Warring States period, every state had their own form of characters. Qin Shi Huang and Li Si, his chancellor, standardized these, making communication possible irrespective of difference in spoken dialect. Guided state ethical ideas for 2,000 years of the Confucian. People might be pedantic and say the state didn't live up to them. It doesn't make it untrue that they were not trying to live them out. Countless emperors and thinkers referenced Confucius's articulation and his values and his works as driving forces behind their actions. The flavor of Chinese civilization, its emphasis on ritual observance, filial piety, xiao, li, propriety, de, morality, permeated through all Chinese literature. And remember, all those scholars through all those years having to memorize the texts went on to influence themselves in their own writings. An impressive feat indeed. If Confucius wasn't speaking to people in a timeless manner, it wouldn't appeal to so many people across space and time. Of the legalists, created strongest army with people's self-interest set towards the good of the state via rewards and punishments. The Qin army were highly motivated. It numbered in the hundreds of thousands and won out over other armies of similar size in numbers unseen before at this time in China. The proof was in the pudding that the Qin unified all under heaven, Tiansha, stabilized China during the Han. Now, with the takeover of the Han after the fall of the Qin, it was clear that something had to change. As Chinese theorists have argued, the Qin was built up to conquer, not to rule, and their legalist extremities were ameliorated by Confucianism during the Han. The combination of the two sets of ideals oversaw Pax Sinica, 400 years of mostly uninterrupted peace. One can hardly imagine the heightened well-being that this peace brought. Built monumental monuments. We all know of the terracotta warriors and take them for granted. Imagine having the vision to make such a thing. There is a quality of grandeur unknown before in Chinese history and rarely elsewhere. We all hear about the hundreds of statues lined up in rows. What we don't hear is how every face was made to be different and were actually painted in vibrant colours. Also, what we don't hear about are the 12 colossi. That is when more than 100,000 influential households from every state were moved to the capital Shenyang and their weapons were taken from them. It was prohibited for these households to possess any. So all swords and daggers were collected and recast into 12 bronze giants called the 12 metal colossi, or Shi'er Jinren. Each were said to weigh around 30 tons. The last of these, unfortunately, were destroyed in the 4th century AD. Overall, because of the realistic, balanced portrayal of the gigachad Confucius and his unintentionally complementary partner, the legalist Shang Yang, I rate this meme ascendant for its accuracy.